The slap rang out before anyone could understand what was happening. A crystal wine glass slipped from the hand of the most powerful man in the room and shattered at the feet of the grandfather sitting in a wheelchair. That Christmas night, Noah Reed had never planned to come back. The Reed family home in the western suburbs of Philadelphia had never been a place meant for him. It was too bright, too cold, too perfect in a way that made it hard to breathe. But his grandfather Arthur's call pulled him back, the old man's voice trembling, so weak it sounded as if one more winter might dissolve it into thin air. "Come back and have one meal with me, Noah. I miss you." Noah drove his old car through a thin veil of snow. In his mind rose the image of the cramped kitchen in Pittsburgh, where he stood for 10 hours every day, hands burned red by hot oil, his back aching constantly. There, he was an anonymous cook. Here, he was the family's disappointment in the eyes of the Reeds. The mansion glowed like a carefully staged theater. White lights lined the eaves, reflecting off cold stone walls. Laughter rose in steady intervals, like background music rehearsed in advance. Vincent Reed, Noah's father, stood at the center of the living room, a perfectly tailored gray suit hugging his frame, a glass of red wine in his hand, talking nonstop about a new hotel project in the Middle East. He laughed loudly, but his eyes calculated, flicking over every nod from the guests, as if counting profit. Celeste, Noah's mother, sat beside him in a shimmering evening gown, her red lips fixed in a frozen smile. She never looked at anyone for long. She looked instead at the reflection of her family in other people's eyes. Noah sat at the far end of the long table, beside his grandfather Arthur. The old wheelchair creaked softly whenever the man shifted. His gray sweater was worn thin at the collar, his hands so gaunt that veins stood out beneath fragile skin. Yet when Arthur placed his hand over Noah's, the warmth was still there, a rare warmth in that cold room. Arthur had taught Noah that money could not buy peace, that a simple meal, when shared with someone you love, could taste better than any lavish banquet. Noah was here only for him. He knew that. And he also knew that in this house, his grandfather was the only one who truly did not belong. The party reached its peak. Knives and forks touched porcelain plates, soft jazz floated in the air. Arthur's hand trembled as he lifted his soup. A single drop spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. The world stopped for one breath. Celeste snapped around. Her perfect smile shattered. Her voice cut like a razor scraping glass. "Oh my God, Dad, you've dirted the table again. Do you have any idea how much this tablecloth costs? Do you know how much effort I put into this party?" The music kept playing, but no one heard it anymore. The spoon slipped from Arthur's hand and tapped against the plate, a sound small and cruel. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking as he shrank into the wheelchair, as if trying to disappear. Celeste did not stop. She laughed coldly. "We're used to this by now. A crippled, useless old man who does nothing but get in the way. All these years, what have you done besides ruining everything around you?" No one spoke. The relatives stared down at their plates as if answers were hidden there. Vincent remained silent, his face flushed from wine and from irritation that his stage had been disrupted. Noah felt blood rush to his head. His hands clenched beneath the table, nails digging into his skin. In his mind flashed images of his grandfather teaching him how to tie his shoes, teaching him never to abandon the weak. Now that same man was curled up like a scolded child, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. Noah shot to his feet. The chair crashed backward, its sharp noise tearing through the room. He had not even spoken yet, but in that moment, no one saw a poor cook from Pittsburgh anymore. They did not know that within the silence of the young man standing there, a power lay dormant, one that this entire house had never once touched. No one expected Noah's first words to drain the air from the room as if all oxygen had been pulled away. He did not shout. He did not curse. It was only one sentence, but it pierced straight through the glossy surface of the party. "Apologize to him right now." A silence as heavy as a collapsed stone slab fell over the dining table. Crystal glasses stood frozen in place. The jazz music from the wall speakers kept trying to crawl through the room, but it sounded trapped behind thick glass. The guest's eyes turned toward Noah, then quickly looked away, as if afraid of being stained by someone who did not belong to their world. Celeste looked at him, her eyes narrowing. The frozen smile sharpened into a thin, cutting curve, like the edge of a blade. "What did you just say, Noah?" Noah did not step back. In that moment, his heart hammered so violently it felt as if someone were striking his chest with a hammer. He looked at his grandfather Arthur. The old man still bowed his head. His thin hands clutched the armrests of the wheelchair, fingers trembling, not only from age, but from humiliation. All his life, even confined to a wheelchair, Arthur had carried a quiet dignity. Yet tonight, over a single drop of soup, he was being humiliated in front of relatives like a discarded object. Noah saw it clearly. And what suffocated him was not Celeste's cruelty, but the silence of everyone else. People who had accepted gifts from Vincent. People who had built their livelihoods on the Reed name. They lowered their heads, pretended to study slices of cold meat, pretended to chew slowly, pretended not to hear. Everyone was afraid. Everyone knew that if they spoke, they would lose their share of the feast of power. Vincent rose from the central chair like a beast whose wounded pride had just been struck. He did not move toward Noah immediately. He first scanned the room, measuring the reactions of the guests. Noah understood this perfectly. To Vincent, this was not about an elderly father being humiliated. This was about a son daring to make him lose face on the stage he had carefully built. Celeste was different. She did not need an audience to be cruel. She needed an audience to prove she was right. She leaned forward, her voice sweet and cold at once. "Apologize? You want me to apologize over a stained tablecloth? How ridiculous. You think I should indulge your emotions just to preserve the dignity of a crippled old man." Arthur flinched, as if each word were a lash striking his back. He wanted to speak, but his throat locked shut. He only lifted his hand slightly, as if to pull Noah back down, as if to take the humiliation onto himself so everything could pass. Noah took his hand. He squeezed gently, just enough for Arthur to know he was there. He spoke slowly, every word clear. "This is not about the tablecloth. He is a person. He does not deserve to be spoken to like that. You need to apologize to him." Celeste laughed, loud and hollow. She looked at Noah as if he were a speck of dust on her sleeve. "You work as a cook in Pittsburgh, don't you? You are used to standing in a kitchen, barking orders in that tiny space of yours, so you think you can give orders here? Have you forgotten where you are standing?" Those words were aimed at Noah, but they also cut Arthur. They declared that both of them were inferior, that both needed to be taught a lesson, placed in their proper position. And in Celeste's eyes, that position was always beneath her feet. Noah heard her, but he did not argue. Inside him, a fire was burning, but he did not let it explode into a scream. He had screamed in his younger years, had tried desperately to prove he was worthy of love. All it brought him was exhaustion. Now he understood. To protect the ones you love, sometimes you have to be hard as stone. Vincent stepped forward. His voice was low, restrained, heavy with command. "Sit down. Right now. Do not embarrass me." Noah looked straight at his father. No one else in the room ever looked at Vincent that way. They looked at him with flattery, with fear, with obedient nods. Noah did not. His gaze made Vincent uncomfortable, as if he were being dragged down from a throne to the floor. "I am not trying to ruin the party," Noah said evenly. "I just want her to apologize to him. One sentence. Just one." An ant on his mother's side shifted slightly, as if about to speak, then stopped. An uncle coughed softly, and lowered his head even further. They all felt the storm coming, but no one wanted to be standing near the window when it hit. Arthur suddenly exhaled, a sound barely louder than wine slipping through a crack. In his cloudy eyes there was pain, but also fear. He feared Noah would share his fate. He feared the grandson he loved would be crushed by this very family. Noah bent down close to him, close enough that only Arthur could hear. "Do not be afraid. Tonight, no one is sending you away alone." Arthur looked at Noah, his eyes red. He did not understand how Noah could stand in the middle of a room full of power and defend him. But somewhere deep inside he knew. Noah did not live on the approval of others. Noah lived on something they all lacked. Courage. Celeste suddenly struck the edge of the tablecloth with her palm, as if setting the rhythm for her anger. Enough. You have made enough of a scene. Who do you think you are? Noah straightened. He felt himself standing at the edge of a decision he could never undo. If he sat down now, he would carry that shame for the rest of his life. If he stood his ground, he would lose this family. But had this family ever truly been his? He looked around the room, at the averted faces, at the luxury hanging from every wall, at his grandfather in the wheelchair like a forgotten shadow. A cold, clear thought formed in his mind. Tonight he might become the one thrown out of his home on Christmas night. But at least, he would not betray himself. He looked back at Vincent, then at Celeste, his voice hard as steel. I will say it one more time. Apologize to him. Right now. The room seemed to choke on those words. No one moved. No one pretended to eat. No one dared to breathe loudly. Every gaze hung suspended between Noah, Vincent, and Celeste, like taut wires ready to snap. Vincent stepped closer. His shoes struck the cold marble floor with a dry sound. In his eyes, Noah no longer saw his father. He saw a man losing control in front of a crowd. To Vincent, power existed only as long as no one dared challenge it. And Noah had just done the unthinkable. You dare talk back to me in front of everyone? Vincent's voice shook, not with emotion, but with rage held down for too long. Who do you think you are, lecturing me and your mother on how to behave? Celeste shot to her feet. Her dress swept violently against the table, making several glasses rattle. She pointed straight at Arthur, her voice sharp and shrill. He has poisoned your mind. A useless man his whole life, what could he teach you except how to drag others down with him? Arthur shuddered. The words lashed his back like whips. He wanted to speak, but it felt as if someone were crushing his throat. He had faced bankruptcy, accidents, betrayal by blood, but never had he felt so small. Sitting there under the blinding lights, he felt like a stain no one wanted to touch. Noah saw everything. He saw his grandfather's shoulders trembling. He saw the thin hands gripping the wheelchair armrests until they turned white. And in that moment, the last trace of hesitation inside him disappeared. Some boundaries, once crossed, could not be ignored. He spoke, his voice dropping, each word heavy as stone. He is not trash. He is your father. He is my grandfather. If you do not apologize to him, I will not sit down. A short, dry laugh burst from Vincent. Are you threatening me? A poor cook living on tips, daring to raise his voice in my house. Vincent stepped closer until only a breath separated them. Noah smelled the heavy scent of alcohol on his father's clothes, the smell of parties, of deals signed in silence, of victories and losses hidden behind polished smiles. Noah looked straight into his eyes. There was no fear there, none of what Vincent was used to seeing in others. I do not need your money, Noah said. I just need you to behave like human beings. That sentence was a knife driven straight into Vincent's pride. He could not bear it. Not because Noah was wrong, but because Noah was right, spoken aloud before the people Vincent needed to impress. Everything happened fast. Vincent raised his hand. The slap cracked through the air, dry and sharp like a whip. The sound exploded in the silent room, slammed into the high walls, and echoed back, searing itself into everyone's memory. Noah's head snapped to the side. A numb pain spread from his left cheek to his temple. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. For a moment, his world swayed. He stood there, straight-backed, like a post driven deep into the ground. Someone gasped softly. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. But no one stepped forward. No one tried to stop it. Vincent pointed at Noah, veins bulging in his neck. You ungrateful bastard. I raised you, and you come back to humiliate me like this? If you want to defend that useless old man, then get out. Get out of my house. Take him with you. And never come back. Celeste stood behind her husband, lips pressed tight. She said nothing more, but the look she gave Noah was colder than blood. In that gaze, Noah understood clearly. From this moment on, he was no longer her son. He was simply something to be discarded for ruining the perfect image she had built. Noah stood still for a few seconds. His cheek burned. His chest rose and fell, not with tears, but with something deeper held tightly inside. He looked around the room one last time. Familiar faces turned away. Expensive paintings hung silently on the walls. Everything was beautiful, elegant, and terrifyingly empty. He turned to his grandfather. Arthur bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. He could not look at Noah. He was afraid. Afraid he was the reason Noah had been struck, expelled, cut off from his family. Noah stepped forward, knelt before the wheelchair, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We are going home, Grandpa." Noah's voice was low, but steady. "You do not need to stay in this place anymore." Arthur looked up. Tears streamed down his aged face, but behind them was a faint, trembling smile. He nodded. Noah stood, pushed the wheelchair toward the door. Each step felt as if he were carrying the entire house on his back. Behind him, Vincent's voice still echoed, shouting with bitterness. "Go. And never come back." The large door opened. The cold night rushed in. Snow fell softly, whitening the path. Noah did not turn around. In that moment, he lost a family. But he also chose the only thing still worth holding on to. The mansion door closed behind them with a deep, heavy thud, like a coffin lid sealing shut the past. Cold air slashed across Noah's face, sharp as a blade. Snow fell thicker now, heavy white sheets covering the stone path where laughter and wine had echoed only minutes earlier. Noah pushed the wheelchair down the steps. His hands were numb from the cold, but he did not let go. Arthur sat still, both hands resting on his thighs, his back slightly curved, as if all strength had been drained from him. He did not turn to look at the house. Not out of hatred, but because he knew that if he did, he might collapse right there. The old car started after a few hesitant turns of the key. Its rough engine sound echoed through the quiet night, small and misplaced beneath the blinding lights of the mansion behind them. Noah helped his grandfather into the passenger seat, folded the wheelchair, and placed it in the trunk. Every movement was slow and careful, as if one careless motion could shatter the world. They drove away. No one followed. No one called out. In the rearview mirror, the Reed house shrank into a distant glow, no longer connected to Noah's life. Throughout the long drive back to Pittsburgh, neither of them spoke. Snow battered the windshield, the wipers squeaking in a steady, merciless rhythm. Noah stared straight ahead. His left cheek still throbbed. The metallic taste lingered in his mouth. But what suffocated him was not the slap. It was the clarity that had finally arrived. That family had never been a place to return to. Arthur sat beside him, eyes fixed on the darkness outside, though he was not truly seeing anything. Memories surged through his mind. Years of being treated like a burden. Parties where he was pushed into corners. Cruel words wrapped in polite tones. Tonight was simply the first time it had exploded openly. The car stopped in front of an old 3-story building, its walls peeling, the hallway lights dim and yellow as if about to die. Noah turned off the engine and drew in a deep breath before opening the door, as though apologizing to life itself. His apartment was so small that 2 steps brought you to a wall. The smell of old cooking oil and burned onions from the previous meal still hung in the air. The wooden floor was scratched. A folding table sat against the wall. A single bed creaked with every movement. Noah turned on all the lights. The glare exposed the poverty without mercy. Arthur looked around in silence for a long time. Noah felt his throat tighten. He was ashamed. Not because he was poor, but because he feared his grandfather would think he had dragged him down from a grand place into a life of scarcity. Arthur settled into place, the wheelchair creaking softly. He ran his hand along the table's edge, then the chair, as if confirming it was real. Finally, he released a very quiet breath. "This is your home?" Noah nodded. Yes. I am sorry. It is small and old. I do not have anything better. Arthur turned to him. His eyes were clouded, but warm. He shook his head slowly. You do not need to apologize. This is a place you live in with your own sweat. Noah turned away quickly, afraid his grandfather would see his reddened eyes. He opened the refrigerator. It was almost empty. Half a roasted chicken wrapped in foil. Some mashed potatoes. A few leftover steamed beans. He took everything out and reheated it in the microwave, which rattled as if it might fall apart. He set the food on the small table, added a glass of warm water, then knelt in front of his grandfather beside the wheelchair. Eat something, Grandpa, Noah said, his voice rough. I am sorry. I did not protect you sooner. I let them say those things. I let my father hit me in front of you. Arthur looked at him for a long time, so long that Noah could not bear it, and lowered his head. Then a thin, bony hand rested on his hair, gentle and slow, familiar as when he was a child. This is not your fault, Arthur said, his voice hoarse but clear. I am the one who troubles everyone. Maybe I should be used to it by now. Those words pierced straight into Noah's heart. He jerked his head up and gripped Arthur's hand tightly. Do not say that. You are never a burden to me. Never. His chest heaved. From now on, you live with me. This apartment is small and poor, but it is home. You are my only family. Arthur looked at him. His lips trembled. He seemed about to speak, then stopped. He only nodded. A tear fell onto the back of Noah's hand, burning hot. That night, Noah cleaned the apartment until late. He laid blankets for his grandfather on the only bed and slept himself on the folding cot by the wall. Only when he heard Arthur's steady breathing did Noah finally close his eyes. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside the small room, amid poverty and loss, something else was forming. Quiet. Unremarkable. But enduring. Like a seed taking root in the dark. On the first morning after Christmas night, Noah woke while the sky was still pitch black. The sound of garbage trucks grinding over wet pavement echoed from afar, slow and heavy, dragging the city awake with it. He sat up on the folding cot, his back aching, his throat dry. With a slight turn, he saw Arthur asleep on the bed, breathing evenly, his aged face softened by a rare, undisturbed rest. Noah rose quietly, afraid to wake him. In the kitchen, he boiled water and reheated the thin porridge left from the night before. The simple smell spread, humble but warm. He placed the bowl on the table, brewed ginger tea, then waited. When Arthur opened his eyes, Noah was already dressed for work, his old backpack slung over his shoulder. I am going to work, Noah said softly. I will come back as early as I can. Arthur nodded. In his eyes was both reassurance and worry. He watched Noah disappear through the door, his chest tightening. He knew that from this moment on, the burden would fall entirely on the shoulders of the grandson he loved most. Noah's first shift at the diner passed in a haze of hot oil and clattering knives. He worked the stove non-stop, Celeste's voice from the night before echoing in his head. By afternoon, without rest, he untied his apron, ran to the supermarket a few blocks away, changed clothes, pulled on rubber gloves, and stood before a sink stacked chest-high with dirty dishes. Hot water poured endlessly. Soap bubbles rose and vanished. Plates piled like mountains. Noah washed and stacked, then washed again. Shift after shift. By the time the wall clock crept close to midnight, his hands were red and burning, his skin wrinkled from water. But he did not stop. In his mind, the image of his grandfather in the wheelchair inside the small apartment never faded. Medicine. Rent. Electricity. None of it waited for pride. The days that followed blurred into a long stretch without pause. Cooking by day. Washing dishes at night. Some evenings he took extra work in the storage room, hauling heavy crates until his shoulders went numb. When he finally returned home, he had just enough time for a cold shower, a change of clothes, and a few hours of sleep before the alarm rang again. Arthur saw everything. He saw Noah growing thinner each day. The dark circles deepening beneath his eyes. The small burns on his hands never fully healing before hot water stung them again. Each time Noah bent down to tie his shoes, Arthur noticed his back stooping earlier than it should. One evening, when Noah stumbled home, exhausted to the point of collapse, Arthur called him over. His voice trembled, but it was firm. "Maybe I should go to a nursing home. They will take care of me there. You do not have to live like this because of me." Noah froze. All the exhaustion inside him condensed into a sharp, piercing pain. He knelt before the wheelchair and wrapped his arms around his grandfather, holding him so tightly that he himself began to shake. "If you leave, I will not have a home either," Noah said, his voice breaking. "You are the reason I get up every morning. The reason I can endure all of this." Arthur was silent for a long time. His hand rested on Noah's back, light as if touching the most fragile thing in his life. From that day on, he never mentioned the nursing home again. But in his heart, another decision had begun to form, quiet and heavy, like a hidden door waiting for the right moment to open. And Noah, in the midst of endless, exhausting nights, had no idea that his silent sacrifices were being seen, being weighed, and would soon lead him to a truth powerful enough to overturn his entire life. The months that followed were not loud. They passed quietly, like the steady rhythm of breathing inside the small apartment. Yet in that quiet, a home was being built, not with money, but with routine, patience, and the smallest gestures. In the mornings, Noah woke before the faint light outside the window. He made pumpkin soup, Arthur's favorite from long ago. The scent of cooked squash mixed with ginger drifted through the air, pushing back the damp mustiness of the old room. He brewed tea, sliced bread, arranged everything neatly on the folding table. When Arthur opened his eyes, Noah was already ready to leave for work. They greeted each other with a short smile, small but strong enough to carry through the long day. At night, the apartment lit up under the old ceiling lamp. Noah came home late, shoulders weighed down, footsteps heavy. Arthur often waited, the television turned low, the sound of the news passing like distant rain. When Noah set his bag down, Arthur told stories, scattered pieces from his youth, about people who had disappeared, about places Noah had never heard of. His voice was hoarse and slow, but warm. Sometimes he stopped mid-sentence, closed his eyes as if searching for a memory that had just slipped from his hand. On some evenings, Arthur taught Noah to fold napkins into swans, each movement slow and precise. Other times, he took a small piece of wood Noah had brought back from the recycling shop and showed him how to plane it lightly without scratching the grain. "Do not rush," he said. "Wood is like people. Rush it, and it breaks." Noah laughed, but those words settled inside him. He did not know why his grandfather, treated by the entire family as a burden, understood so well the things that required patience. He did not ask. There were questions he felt would shatter this peace the moment he spoke them out loud. Arthur watched Noah with quiet eyes. He saw his grandson changing little by little. No longer a young man living only for the present, Noah began reading management books on the rare nights he had time. He kept notes of expenses, calculated every small amount, not to become rich, but to make sure he would never again have to apologize for not having enough. But Arthur also noticed what Noah did not. The short phone calls Arthur made while Noah was at work. The letters that were sent out and then hidden deep in the farthest drawer. The mornings Arthur sat for a long time by the window, staring outside, one hand resting motionless on his knee, as if weighing something far greater than this apartment. One afternoon, when Noah came home earlier than usual, he caught Arthur staring at an old photograph. In it, a young man stood in front of a wide woodworking shop, eyes sharp, one hand resting on a finely finished wooden table. Noah stopped short. The man in the photo looked strangely like Arthur, but something was different. That gaze held a kind of authority Noah had never seen in his grandfather. Arthur quickly put the photograph away. "Just an old memory," he said lightly, but something in his tone closed shut too fast. Noah did not press further. He could feel the invisible boundary. He only knew this: Arthur was not merely a gentle old man pushed into the corner by life. Behind that silence lay a past deep and heavy, like a river running underground. At night, Noah lay on the folding cot, staring at the peeling ceiling. Inside him, a strange feeling began to glow. This peace was precious, but fragile, as if it existed only to prepare them for something else, something larger, something more violent. Arthur did not sleep either. He watched Noah through the crack of the half-open door. He saw his grandson sleeping, his face so much younger when he no longer had to hold himself tight. Arthur let out a soft sigh. In his heart, a decision was nearing the moment it had to be made, not to change his own fate, but to protect the only person who had chosen him when the whole world turned away. Outside, wind moved through the old buildings. Inside the small apartment, between poverty and love, a secret was waiting for the day it would be awakened. The trip began on a morning that felt strangely calm. Early summer sunlight poured through the apartment window, turning the peeling paint on the walls golden. Noah had just finished washing the breakfast dishes when he heard Arthur call his name, in a voice unlike his usual one, not hoarse, not trembling, clear and firm. "Drive me somewhere today, Noah." Noah looked up. His grandfather had not asked to go anywhere for months except medical checkups. Noah nodded at once, without asking questions. Sometimes, he had learned, trust was its own kind of courage. The old car rolled forward. Arthur sat in the passenger seat, hands resting on his thighs, his back straighter than usual. He did not give an address. He only gave short directions: turn left, go straight, cross the bridge. Noah followed. The city fell away behind them. Familiar streets disappeared. The road widened. Ancient trees lined both sides, stone walls rose high, iron gates stood closed and silent. Noah felt his heartbeat slow, then quicken again. "Stop here," Arthur said. Before them stood a massive black iron gate, carved with intricate patterns. Noah had not even managed to ask a question when the gate opened soundlessly. Two men in dark suits stepped forward and bowed deeply toward the passenger seat. "Welcome home, sir." Noah went still. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Arthur only nodded slightly, as if this required no explanation. A white gravel road stretched on like it had no end, rose gardens blooming on both sides. At the center stood a three-tier fountain of pale stone, water sparkling in the sun. At the end of the road, a building appeared, not a mansion, but an old estate, red-tiled roof, curved balconies, stained glass windows reflecting light like a painting. Noah parked at the steps. His hands trembled. "Grandpa, where are we?" Arthur looked at him, his eyes deeper and brighter than Noah had ever seen. "Our home," he said. His voice was light, but it carried a weight that stole Noah's breath. The front doors opened. An older woman in a neat black dress hurried out, a white handkerchief clenched in her hand. When she saw Arthur, she dropped to her knees on the steps, tears pouring down uncontrollably. "Sir, you are finally back." Arthur lifted one hand, a small gesture, but enough to make everything stop. Noah pushed the wheelchair up the steps. The wheels rolled over ice-cold marble. When he stepped into the main hall, Noah almost lost all feeling in his legs. The ceiling soared. A crystal chandelier hung like a field of stars. Dark wood panels lined the walls, massive oil paintings, a white stone spiral staircase twisting upward. 2 rows of staff stood along the walkway in black and white uniforms, bowing in unison. "Welcome home, sir." Their voices rose together, loud and solemn. Noah was dizzy. He could no longer see the cramped apartment. No longer smell frying oil. No longer feel the endless nights of exhaustion. In a single breath, everything seemed to be pulled out of his hands. Arthur rolled forward. The staff immediately stepped aside. No one dared meet his eyes. No one dared speak. Noah followed behind, his mind empty. He wanted to ask. He wanted to shout. He wanted to shake his grandfather and demand whether this was a dream. But his throat locked. They stopped before a large wooden door. Arthur closed it himself behind them. The room inside was wide, polished wooden floors, bookshelves stretching to the ceiling, a dark wooden desk at the center. Sunlight streamed through tall windows and fell across Arthur's face. Arthur turned his wheelchair and looked at Noah. In that moment, Noah no longer saw an old man everyone dismissed. He saw someone who had once stood very high, someone used to giving orders, someone who had once held the fate of an entire world in his hands. Arthur drew in a deep breath. Noah, it is time I told you a story I buried for far too long. Noah sat in the chair opposite him, gripping the armrest tightly. His heart pounded hard enough to hurt. He did not know where the story would take him, but he knew that from the moment that gate opened, his life had turned onto a road with no way back. Arthur did not speak right away. He slowly turned his wheelchair, looking out at the rose garden beyond the tall window. Sunlight fell across his face, revealing deep lines etched like marks of time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady, as if he were reading from a record he had long memorized. There was a time, long before you were born, when I did not sit in this wheelchair. I stood. And when I stood, many people listened. Noah held his breath. Each word pulled him out of the room and hurled him into a past that had never been told. Arthur said that when he was in his middle years, he built a small woodworking shop from nothing. At first there were only a few craftsmen, a few handmade tables and chairs. But he had an eye for wood. He understood grain, texture, and how an inanimate object could carry a soul if it was made the right way. Large hotels began placing orders. Luxury resorts came looking for him. The small shop became a factory. The factory became a corporation. The name Blackstone Atelier spread across the eastern United States, synonymous with quality and discipline. They called him a guide, Arthur said, a faint trace of an old smile touching his lips. Newspapers wrote about him. Orders were booked years in advance. He thought he had reached the peak. He paused, his hand tightening slightly on his thigh. Then everything collapsed within a few months. Noah felt a chill run down his spine. Arthur spoke of contracts cancelled without warning. Exclusive designs appearing identically at a rival corporation. Prices undercut. Clients turning away. Cash flow drying up for no clear reason. He examined every invoice, every account, every signature. And finally, he found the truth. Arthur turned to Noah. His gaze was sharp enough to steal Noah's breath. The one who betrayed me was Vincent. Your father. The room seemed to tilt. Noah's ears rang. He shook his head instinctively, as if shaking hard enough could shatter the truth. Arthur continued without flinching. Vincent had been the chief financial officer from the very beginning. Arthur trusted his son completely. Vincent copied designs, leaked internal data and client lists to a competitor in exchange for position and money, a great deal of money. Everything was done cleanly and precisely, so well that no one outside the inner circle would ever have discovered it. Arthur drew a long breath, then his voice dropped, heavier. But Vincent did not act alone. Your grandmother signed off on those transfers. She legitimized everything. Noah's throat burned dry. Vague memories of a grandmother who was always silent, always avoiding Arthur's eyes, suddenly came into focus. Arthur continued, his voice steady, but each word weighed like lead. When the truth came out, she divorced me. She took what remained and disappeared. I lost the company. I lost my family. And then the accident happened. Arthur lowered his gaze and placed a hand on his motionless legs beneath the thin blanket. A truck hit my car head-on. I survived. But I never stood again. Noah could not speak. Images overlapped in his mind, the gentle grandfather humiliated and dismissed, and the man who had once stood at the top, pushed into the abyss by his own blood. A pain rose in him, not for money or power, but for the loneliness that had stretched on for years. I lay bedridden for nearly a year, Arthur said. No money. No company. No family. I thought I was finished. He looked at Noah, his eyes softening. But then I realized something. I still had my hands. I still had my mind. And I refused to die as a defeated man. Noah lowered his head. Tears fell onto the wooden floor. No one wiped them away. Arthur let him cry. He understood that some truths could only be received through tears. After a long time, Arthur spoke again, his voice low and firm. What you see outside is not a miracle. It is the result of many years of silence, endurance, and starting over from nothing. And that story, Noah, is not finished yet. Noah looked up. The shock in his eyes had faded, replaced by something forming slowly but steadily. Understanding. And with it, a responsibility he had never imagined he would carry. Arthur did not stop there. He turned back to the desk, opened a deep drawer, and took out an old leather-bound notebook, its edges worn as if it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. He placed it on the desk without hurry. His expression was calm, but beneath it ran a torrent held back for years. After the accident, Arthur said, I sold everything I had left. A few old pieces of jewelry. My only watch. I rented an abandoned garage on the edge of the city. The roof leaked. Winters cut like knives. I sat in my wheelchair among scrap wood and called the old workers who had once worked with me. Not one of them refused. Noah imagined it clearly. A man who once stood at the summit, now sitting in darkness and damp air, hands trembling from cold, eyes never leaving the drawings. His throat tightened. The first batch was only a few oak tables, Arthur continued. I drew every detail myself. Selected every grain by hand. Worked late into the night, sometimes until nearly morning. The first customer was a roadside motel. They saw the quality. They placed another order. Arthur nodded faintly, as if confirming a truth that needed no display. From a few workers, it became a workshop. From a workshop, several factories. I never used the Reed name. I never let Vincent know. I built everything quietly, bought back old land through shell companies, signed contracts under names the press never noticed. Noah listened as each piece fell into place. Questions he had swallowed for years found their answers. Why his grandfather understood Wood so deeply. Why he never complained. Why he endured humiliation without resistance. It was not weakness. It was patience. Arthur looked at Noah for a long moment, then opened a second drawer. This time he took out two thick folders tied with dark ribbon and placed them in Noah's hands. Their weight pressed down, not because of paper, but because of meaning. The first folder is my will, Arthur said. Everything I own, assets, factories, land, control of the company, it is all in there. It belongs to you. Noah froze. He wanted to speak, to refuse, to ask why, but no sound came. Arthur did not give him time to react. He placed a hand on the second folder. This one is the truth, Arthur said, his voice lowering. Every transfer. Every email. Every recording. Everything Vincent and your mother did. I kept it all. For many years. Noah's heart pounded painfully. He opened the second folder. Pages upon pages. Seals. Copies. Cold evidence that left no room for denial. Each page was a cut. Each cut was a year Arthur had lived in silence. Arthur laid his hand over Noah's. He spoke slowly, each word clear. I am not giving this to you for revenge. You can keep it hidden. You can reveal it. The decision is yours. Noah looked up. The shock in his eyes had transformed into another weight. Responsibility. He understood why Arthur chose him. Not because of blood. But because he had stayed, even when he knew nothing of any of this. Arthur met his gaze. You washed dishes until your hands split to buy my medicine. You slept on a folding bed so I could have the bed. You did not need to know who I was to love me. That is why. Noah lowered his head. The two folders rested on his lap, heavy as an entire lifetime. In that moment, he knew he was no longer an anonymous cook. He stood at a crossroads where every step would change many lives. Outside the window, wind moved through the rose garden. Inside the dark wood room, a secret had been passed on. And far away, in another mansion, those who still believed they were safe had no idea that the shadow of truth had begun to move toward them. Rain began to fall the moment Noah turned onto the road leading up to the old mansion. Heavy drops struck the windshield and dragged into long streaks like scratches that could never be erased. He cut the engine and sat still for a beat, feeling the familiar weight of the briefcase beside him. Not the weight of paper, but the weight of a decision that had been made the moment he closed Arthur's study door. The front door opened. Warm yellow light spilled out, familiar in a way that felt cold. Vincent sat on the long sofa in a silk robe, a glass of liquor in his hand, eyes locked on financial news. Celeste was at the small dining table, a tablet in front of her, fingers flicking fast. They turned at the sound of footsteps. No greeting. No surprise. Only irritation. "You still have the nerve to come back," Vincent said, his voice low and heavy, as if Noah were an unpaid debt. In his mind he saw Arthur sitting quietly in that dark wood office, his aged hands resting on the folders, trusting. "I came to give you one last chance," Noah said, his voice strangely calm. "Tell the truth. Apologize to him. That is all." Celeste scoffed and folded her arms. "More nonsense that useless old man stuffed into your head. A man who has been worthless his whole life can invent nothing but bitterness." Vincent set his drink down and stood. He walked toward Noah slowly, each step like he was stamping his own house into the floor. "You dare accuse me? I built everything with my sweat and my mind. That old man only knows how to destroy." Noah looked straight into his father's eyes. What he saw there was not confidence. It was fear of being exposed. He opened the briefcase without haste. Every movement was deliberate. He placed the thick folder on the table and opened it. Pages sprang loose. Copies. Official seals. Vincent froze. Color drained from his face so fast Noah could see it happening. Celeste stepped closer, bent to look, her lips trembling before she forced them tight again. "These are emails," Noah said evenly. "These are transfers. These are recordings. Everything you did. For years." Vincent lunged forward, grabbed a fistful of pages, and tore them apart. Paper flew up like filthy snow. "Fraud. It is all fake. That old man made it up. He used you." Celeste screamed, her voice piercing. "Get him out for bringing this into my house. Burn it all. How dare you smear your parents like this?" Noah did not move. He watched them closely. The man who had once slapped him in front of relatives was trembling now. The woman who had humiliated Arthur over a single drop of soup was pale as ash. Not one apology. Not 1 second of remorse. Only panic. Noah closed the briefcase. His voice dropped, firm and final. "I gave you a chance. You did not want it." Vincent stepped forward 1 pace, his voice breaking. "Noah. Stop. I am your father." Noah turned away. The rain outside fell in heavy sheets. He opened the door. The shouting behind him shattered in the wide space and could no longer reach him. When the door closed, Noah stood under the rain and felt a strange lightness. Not because of revenge, but because at last he had stopped waiting for them to become what they had never been. 3 days later the city woke to sirens and flashing blue and red lights reflecting off glass towers. Noah was not there. He sat in the vast living room of the estate beside Arthur as the wall-mounted television showed images that were familiar and yet horrifyingly strange. Reed Crown Hospitality headquarters was sealed off. Boxes of files were carried out. Faces that had once appeared on magazine covers now bowed under the rain. Arthur said nothing. He only placed his hand over Noah's and squeezed gently. The gesture held no triumph. It felt like a farewell to a chapter that had gone on far too long. At a cafe across from the Justice Department building, Jonah Park closed his laptop, eyes red from too many nights without sleep. He looked at Noah and spoke slowly. "This is not just fraud. This is an entire system. Organized. Intentional. When I signed the search warrants, I knew it would collapse faster than people think. The news spread like fire and wind. Partners pulled funding. Reservations were canceled in waves. Employees gathered outside headquarters demanding unpaid wages. The stock plunged. The praise that had once lifted Vincent up now turned and tore at him without mercy. When he was led to the patrol car, Vincent wore no suit, no tie. His hair was messy, his eyes sunken. He did not resist. He only bowed his head, as if he had finally felt the true weight of what he had done. Cameras zoomed in. Handcuffs clicked shut. Headlines scrolled across the screen, cold and final. Celeste appeared later in oversized sunglasses that hid half her face, her hands shaking as she stepped down from the car. She kept her spine straight, still trying to hold the posture of someone who had once stood above others. But cameras did not need words. They captured every tremor, every swallowed breath. The trial lasted many months. Noah sat in the back row in dark clothing, no insignia, no display. Arthur did not attend. He stayed home by the window facing the rose garden, listening to nightly updates. Jonah called witnesses. Gray-haired craftsmen took the stand, hands trembling with age but voices firm. They spoke of winter nights in a leaking garage, of a man in a wheelchair sketching every line on scrap paper, of designs stolen without shame. The defense attacked, questioned, twisted. Each time, Jonah placed another piece of evidence on the table. Emails. Bank records. Recordings. The chain tightened until there was no space left for denial. On sentencing day, the courtroom was dead silent. The judge read slowly, each charge landing like a hammer against stone. When the sentence was announced, Vincent stood rigid. His knees buckled. An officer held him up. Celeste heard the judgment for herself, her face straining, lips pressed tight. There was no sobbing. Only a heavy emptiness. Noah stood when it ended. He did not look back. In the hallway, reporters swarmed him, questions spilling fast. He paused for one beat and faced the camera lens. I only did what was right. The rest, let the law speak. Then he walked out into the rain. At home, Arthur waited by the fireplace, a cup of hot tea sending up thin steam. Noah knelt and laid his head in Arthur's lap as he had as a child. It is done, Grandpa. Arthur stroked his hair, his voice much lighter than before. It is done. Now we can sleep in peace. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside that room, a circle had closed, not with hatred, but with the truth spoken at the right time. Arthur did not let Noah rest long in the role of heir. Only days after the trial, before the dust had even settled, he called Noah into the woodworking shop behind the estate. No boardroom. No long table. Only the scent of fresh cut wood, fine dust floating in morning light, and the steady hum of machines. Tomorrow you start work here, Arthur said calmly, as if assigning a small task. No title. No privilege. Noah froze. Grandpa, I do not know anything about machines or running factories. I only know how to cook. Arthur looked at him, strict and gentle at once. Then even better. Start from the beginning. Sweep the floor. Plane the wood. Learn to listen to material before you give orders to people. On the first day, Noah wore old protective gear and stood in the shop like he did not belong. No one knew who he was. They only saw a young man bending to pick up wood scraps, hands blistered from planing table edges that were not yet straight. Arthur sat in a distant corner pretending to read the newspaper, but his eyes never left Noah. In the days that followed, Noah learned how to fail without running. He ruined boards. He was scolded. His back and hands ached. He was so exhausted at night he only wanted to collapse. But every time he thought of stopping, he remembered the small apartment in Pittsburgh, the nights washing dishes until his hands split, the way his grandfather had endured humiliation without complaint. Then Arthur began to weaken. His coughing came more often. His wheelchair moved more slowly. Noah moved his bed into Arthur's room. He cooked soup, fed him spoon by spoon, wiped sweat from his forehead in the middle of the night. Once Arthur woke and whispered, so softly it was almost nothing, that he feared he would not live long enough to see Noah live a peaceful life. Noah bent down until his forehead touched Arthur's. I have been at peace for a long time. Because I have you. That morning the sunlight through the curtains was gentle. Noah carried a tray of soup into the room. Arthur lay there with his eyes closed, the corners of his mouth slightly lifted, as if he were smiling. His hand was still warm, but it no longer gripped Noah's. Noah sat down, held him, and cried until he had no breath left, not from loss alone, but because the love was too vast. The funeral was simple. No extravagant flowers. No long speeches. Hundreds came to say goodbye, old craftsmen, young employees, people Arthur had helped in silence. They all told Noah the same thing: you are like him. After that, Noah stood before the board of directors. He did not speak of profit. He spoke of quality, of character, of how a company should exist not only to earn money, but to never shame those who had believed in it. He created a scholarship fund in Arthur's name for young people who had been abandoned, those judged as lesser but who had never. This story is not only Noah's. It is for anyone who has been looked down on, pushed to the edge, and still chose to live with kindness. If you have made it this far, share what you feel. If the story touched you, leave a comment. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, follow and support the channel so the journey does not end here.